Hi, I'm John Maxwell. When the top companies in the world are looking for trainers, speakers, and coaches, there's one name that stands above the rest, and that's Maxwell Leadership. Our certified team members have gotten proven results for companies all over the globe, and our reputation, I'm proud to say, is second to none. Some of our members have risen to the top of their profession, including the one you're going to meet today. I proudly introduce you to my friend Bob Fabian Zinka.
Welcome to the Leadership and Success Podcast with your host, Coach BZ, where we help you lead with purpose and succeed with impact. If you're ready to grow into the kind of leader others want to follow, this podcast is for you. If you're determined to elevate your success and leave a lasting legacy, this podcast is for you. As my mentor, Dr. John C. Maxwell reminds us, everything rises and falls on leadership. Our goal is simple: to inspire you, challenge you, and equip you with insights that can transform the trajectory of your leadership journey. Welcome aboard to another episode of the Leadership and Success Podcast with Coach BZ.
All right, everyone, welcome to a very special edition of the Leadership and Success Podcast. So this is going to be the premiere for our Black History Year series. So it's a very special edition of the Leadership and Success Podcast. I'm going to be talking about Black history, and we're going to be doing it every day until the end of the year. So just to get started, I thought I would start with this article I wrote last week. Why does Black history matter? I called it A Nation Scar, Not a Political Wedge. Okay, not about politics, but about why Black history matters for every U.S. citizen. Right? We need to remember it, we need to learn it, we need to lead, and we need to build a more perfect union, because our history is our responsibility and really our future. So this podcast is going to let you know why this is important for everyone. And I'm going to have a back-to-back podcast today. Right after this one should last about 30 minutes or so. Right after that, I'm going to have a second podcast where we're going to be talking about the books we need to study to learn Black history. I will give you kind of like the dirty dozen. I call them the essential dozen now. I started with 10, but here they are. Again, the next podcast we'll be talking about it. And then I also added Black AF History. I think it's a book everybody needs to read. And also African America, celebrating 400 years of achievement. So for right now, I'm going to play the podcast, about 30 minutes long, A Nation Scar, Not a Political Wedge, Why Black History Year Matters. And if you have any question, type it in the chat. Let me also know where you are joining us from, what city, what state, and if outside of the US, which country. And also, what are you guys grateful for today? And again, 3 to 5 takeaways after you hear the podcast. And very glad to see Daniel is here, joining us from Maitland, Florida. Thanks again for being here, Daniel. A very active member of our community. And for the next podcast, which is going to be right after this one, something important is I'm going to need your help, right? If there is any book that you have, any literature or any story you would like to highlight, please let us know. This way we are going to add those to the bookshelf. I started with about 125 books, I think it was last week. Now we have over 200 books already. So thank you so much for all of the recommendations I am receiving everywhere. Let's try to build this bookshelf as one of the most comprehensive one on the internet and social media, to cover everything about Black history, from military, from invention, slavery. I mean, absolutely everything, politics, civil rights. Let it be as comprehensive as possible. Okay. Before I forgot from the previous podcast, and since really Juneteenth, I've always been really grateful for freedom. But in addition, right now, I am really grateful for the history of African American in this country, right? Just we've shown so much resilience and just innovation, and always willing to build, always trying to really make America believe what America wrote in its own founding document: all men are created equal. I am a man, so that includes me too. It is basically, the more I think about it, if it wasn't for African American, America would pretty much be a white republic, right, apartheid state. But it's because of African Americans that America became what it was meant to be, what its ideal was, which is a multinational, multi-ethnic, uh, constitutional, democratic republic. It's because of Black people in America that everybody got to vote, including women and other minority. If it wasn't for African American, the only people voting in this country would be very, very wealthy white men. Not even all white men, because people who didn't have land, people who didn't have any money, wouldn't even vote. Their voice would not be heard. But because of African American, America has become the democracy it aspired to become. So I am really, really grateful for that. All right, why is Black history important? Here we go.
Imagine being hired to protect the computer network of a multi-billion-dollar tech company. Like, the stakes are just incredibly high.
Oh, absolutely. The infrastructure is sprawling, and you're basically the one keeping the whole thing from collapsing.
Right, exactly. So it's your first day, you sit down at your terminal, and the CEO walks in. And they casually mention that they've intentionally deleted the security logs of every major breach from the last 200 years.
Wow. Just wiped the hard drives completely.
Totally wiped. And when you ask why, they just tell you that looking at past failures is, it's too depressing. They'd rather just focus on the positive stuff.
I mean, you would look at that CEO and tell them they are committing operational suicide.
Right. You simply can't patch a system if you refuse to study its past vulnerabilities.
You'd be flying entirely blind. I mean, in any field, technical, medical, military, deliberately ignoring the data of past failures is just gross negligence.
It is. And yet, according to the source material we are diving into today, that is precisely how we often treat the historical operating system of the United States.
Yeah, it really is.
So welcome to the deep dive. Today is July 17, 2026. We are waking up right on the heels of America's massive semi-quincentennial, the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence.
The fireworks have barely even faded for you listening right now.
Exactly. And while big milestone birthdays are naturally a time for celebration, they also demand a profound, really clear-eyed look in the mirror. So for you, the listener, we are exploring a deeply compelling piece of writing published just yesterday on LinkedIn.
Yeah, it's titled America 250, A Nation's Scar, Not a Political Wedge, Why Black History Matters.
And the author of this piece is really what makes the perspective so gripping, isn't it?
Oh, for sure. Bob Fabian Zinga. He goes by BZ. He is a U.S. Navy Information Warfare Commander.
Which is an intense title.
It is. And he's also a cybersecurity executive who has navigated the highest levels of both the military and Silicon Valley. Like, he sits on boards for cybersecurity alliances.
So this is an individual whose entire professional existence revolves around analyzing data.
Right. Analyzing complex data sets, identifying threat vectors, ensuring network resilience. He leads highly specialized teams through chaotic environments.
So for the listener who might not be super familiar with military structures, an information warfare commander isn't just someone making sure the base Wi-Fi is working right. What does that role actually entail?
It's incredibly vast. An information warfare commander deals with the weaponization and the protection of data. We are talking about cyber operations, signals intelligence, electronic warfare.
Information operations.
Exactly. Their whole job is to ensure that commanders have an uncorrupted, complete picture of the battle space. They hunt for hidden vulnerabilities in their own systems.
While also trying to exploit the blind spots of the adversary, I'd imagine.
Right. They are obsessed with data integrity because if a piece of information is missing or altered, it can lead to catastrophic real-world consequences.
Which perfectly frames the mission of our deep dive today. We are exploring Zinga's central thesis here, which is treating historical literacy not as some, exhausting political debate, but as a non-negotiable component of operational readiness.
He is taking history completely out of the partisan arena. He's placing it squarely onto the desk of any modern leader.
And he conducts this exploration essentially as a military after-action review, right?
Yeah, an AR. In the military, a structured review process happens after a mission, and the objective of an AR is not to point fingers or make people feel terrible about their mistakes.
Right, it's about the truth.
Exactly. Unvarnished truth. What was supposed to happen? What actually happened? Why was there a variance? And how do we update our standard operating procedure so we don't make the same fatal error tomorrow?
Zinga just applies that exact pragmatic framework to the American historical narrative. So let's look at the catalyst. the spark that actually prompted him to sit down and write this piece.
Yeah, it started with a very specific, quiet interaction with a peer.
He shares that a fellow respected information warfare commander came to him with a question. And honestly, it's a question I can hear a listener right now thinking to themselves, maybe quietly.
Right. The colleague asked, if Black history is American history, why do we need Black history? Shouldn't we also have Chinese American history, Polish American history, Jewish American history, and so on?
It is the classic melting pot argument. If we are all running on the same American operating system, why do we need to segment the data by demographics?
Doesn't hyphenating our history just create unnecessary divisions? That's the thought process.
Exactly that. And I think the instinct for many people, when confronted with that question, is to immediately jump to the defensive.
Oh, walls go right up.
Yeah, people get emotional, and the conversation devolves into a screaming match. So how does a cyber expert process that inquiry without triggering those emotional tripwires?
By treating it as a legitimate inquiry regarding data classification, Zynga explicitly calls it an honest question.
An honest question deserving an honest answer.
Right. He doesn't shame his colleague for asking it, and the answer he provides completely sidesteps the subjective argument of whose history is, more important.
He doesn't say Black history matters more than Polish American history.
No, instead he points to a glaring, verifiable data discrepancy. He explains that this specific subset of history has been systematically forgotten, overlooked, or intentionally omitted from mainstream historical education.
Intentionally omitted. That is a really heavy accusation to level against an educational system.
It is, but he backs it up. He notes the massive unbroken trail of documentary evidence that has always existed in the archives but was deliberately excluded from the syllabus.
So Polish American history, for example, wasn't legally suppressed by centuries of state-mandated anti-literacy laws.
Exactly. The data wasn't actively scrubbed from the mainframe by legislative action, but Black history was.
And if you view this through the lens of a cybersecurity professional, the implications are just terrifying.
Because your situational awareness is compromised from the jump.
Precisely. In any context, leaders cannot make sound decisions when critical information is deliberately hidden from them.
It creates a state of institutional blindness. Every chief information security officer studies incident reports. Every time a commercial airliner has a near miss, the FAA dissects the data.
Strong institutions study their failures with forensic intensity.
Right, so Zynga argues strong nations must do the exact same thing. If you ignore the corrupted data, you cannot patch the system.
I really want you, the listener, to pause and apply this to your own daily life right now. Think about your profession, whether you are managing a logistics supply chain or running a pediatric ward.
Or steering a venture capital firm.
Right. Imagine the sheer chaos that would unfold if you had to operate using a data set where 30% of the critical information just vanished before it reached your desk.
You would authorize terrible investments. You would misdiagnose illnesses.
You would drive your organization off a cliff, not because you were incompetent, but because your informational foundation is built on a void.
And that is the exact scale of the stakes Zynga is laying out here regarding national leadership. Framing it as a data integrity problem removes the emotional volatility.
It shifts the conversation from a culture war grievance to a matter of basic professional competence.
Do you want to operate with a partial data set or a complete one? It's that simple.
So if missing data is the core vulnerability, the next logical question we have to explore is the scope of the breach. Just how much data are we missing? And how deep into the system's architecture does this go?
This brings us to a section of the article that is deeply arresting. Zynga transitions to the stark, undeniable mathematical reality of the American timeline.
The mathematics of time. This is where the analytical mind really forces the issue. We often suffer from temporal distortion, right? We compress things that happened a long time ago into a single blurry era.
But Zynga forces us to look at the hard numbers. He lays out a timeline that is deeply personal to his own family tree, yet universally applicable to the nation's architecture.
Right. He documents that his own direct ancestors arrived as enslaved Africans in English Virginia on August 20th, 1619.
The arrival of the first documented enslaved Africans in that specific colony. That is the initial insertion of the code into the system.
Then we fast forward to the nationwide formalization of emancipation via the 13th Amendment in 1865. When you do the math on that, it is 246 years.
246 years of institutionalized, legally codified slavery.
To truly understand the weight of that, you have to look at the other side of the equation, from 1865 to our present day in 2026.
Right. That is a span of 161 years.
161 years since the 13th Amendment.
So Zynga highlights this staggering mathematical reality that just fundamentally alters how you perceive the timeline. Black Americans will not have been legally free for as long as they were legally enslaved until the year 2111.
The year 2111. I want that to sit in the air for a second for the listener. We won't even hit the break-even point on the timeline of freedom versus enslavement until most of the people listening to this deep dive are gone.
You take 1865, the year it was abolished, and you add the 246 years it was in active operation. 2111. We are still nearly a century away from equilibrium.
I was trying to find a way to visualize this because human brains aren't great at processing vast expanses of time.
Right.
Think about it like a book.
Okay, a book.
Yeah, if America's history was a 400-page historical epic and you sit down to read it to understand the world it describes, the first 246 pages of that book feature legal slavery as a foundational economic and social component. We, sitting here today celebrating the 250th anniversary, are only on page 407. You simply cannot understand the plot, the motivations of the characters, or the current conflicts by only reading the last few chapters.
No, you can't. Because the fundamental rules of gravity in that universe were established in the first 246 pages. That analogy perfectly illustrates the concept of systemic momentum.
The structures built during those first pages don't just vanish because you turn the page to chapter 247.
Exactly. And to drive home that this is not some abstract, dusty antiquity, Zynga brings in his deeply personal connection. He notes that his father, Robert Zynga, was born in 1943.
1943. We are in the thick of World War II. The arsenal of democracy is firing on all cylinders.
Yes. And in 1943, it was entirely illegal for a black person to become a commissioned officer in the United States Navy.
That barrier wasn't broken until 1944.
Right, when a group known as the Golden 13 finally earned their commissions.
Let's expand on that because the implications for military leadership and talent management are profound. The United States is fighting a two-front existential global war in 1943.
They are desperate for every single ounce of strategic, logistical, and combat talent they can find.
Yet the institutional operating system was so deeply corrupted by its own racial code that it artificially restricted its own talent pool. They would rather fight a global war shorthanded than commission a black officer.
It is the ultimate example of a system self-sabotaging due to bad data. The friction those 13 men faced in 1944 to get those commissions was astronomical.
And Zynga uses this to shatter the illusion that we are talking about ancient history.
Right. Zynga himself is a high-ranking commander today. His own father was born into an America where Zynga's current rank was legally unattainable based purely on the color of his skin.
That shrinks the timeline down to nothing. We're talking about one single generation.
There are people walking around today enjoying their retirement who were born before the U.S. Navy allowed a black man to be an officer.
When you look at the raw data of the timeline, the distance between the past and the present just collapses.
Zynga includes a quote from the American novelist and essayist James Baldwin that captures the psychology of this perfectly. He said, "People are trapped in history, and history is trapped in them."
History is trapped in them. It implies that the past isn't something behind us, it's something we are physically carrying.
The systemic effects, the wealth disparities, the cultural memories, they do not reset to zero simply because a new law is passed. The data from the past is constantly running in the background of the present operating system.
So knowing that this massive span of time reaches right up to touch the present day, we have to look at how earlier generations tried to debug the system. They saw the massive omissions in the educational data, and they attempted to write a fix.
This brings the discussion to the concept of institutional correction, and it centers on a pivotal historical figure, Dr. Carter G. Woodson.
Often referred to as the father of Black history. Zynga outlines Dr. Woodson's timeline, which reads like a masterclass in trying to patch a national blind spot from the ground up.
Yeah, in 1915, Dr. Woodson founded the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History.
The following year, in 1916, he launched the Journal of Negro History.
And then a decade later, in 1926, he established Negro History Week.
It is vital to understand the environment Woodson was operating in during the 1910s and 1920s.
Right. The academic establishment of that era was actively producing historical narratives that glorified the Confederacy and diminished the realities of slavery and Reconstruction.
Woodson wasn't just introducing new data, he was fighting a massive institutionalized counter-narrative.
What Zynga emphasizes heavily here is the intent behind Woodson's actions. Because in our highly polarized climate today, anything that designates a specific time for a specific group is instantly viewed through the lens of a culture war maneuver.
Oh, absolutely. But in 1926, the intent was rigorously and purely educational. It was not designed to be divisive.
It was aimed at encouraging serious, peer-reviewed, empirical historical scholarship to correct glaring omissions in the national memory.
It was about restoring data integrity to the archives. He was just trying to put the missing pages back into the 400-page book so people could read the whole story.
And that effort scaled over time. 50 years after Woodson initiated Negro History Week, right in the middle of America's massive bicentennial celebrations in 1976, it was officially expanded and recognized by the government as Black History Month.
The objective scaled, but the core mission remained identical: broaden the American understanding of its own operating system.
I can see the logical progression: Negro History Week in 1926, Black History Month during the bicentennial in 1976.
So what is Zynga arguing for right now during our 250th anniversary in 2026? Are we just hitting copy-paste on the bicentennial?
This is where Zynga pushes the paradigm forward. He argues that one isolated month is no longer sufficient for the complexity of the system. He is advocating for Black History Year.
Black History Year, that is a significant shift in how we structure learning.
His reasoning is rooted in operational reality. History does not occur in a vacuum for 1 month out of the year, and our analysis of it shouldn't either.
The goal isn't to maintain a separate, parallel historical track that only gets accessed in February.
Exactly. The goal is total data integration. He wants to seamlessly integrate the military service, the entrepreneurship, the faith, and the immense innovation of African Americans into the daily 365-day narrative of how the country was built and maintained.
Going back to our corporate analogy, if you are the CEO, you wouldn't isolate your company's entire cybersecurity review to just 1 month of the year and then ignore it for the other 11.
You have to monitor the network constantly to understand your vulnerabilities.
Zynga pulls a quote from Jawaharlal Nehru, the former Prime Minister of India, that fits beautifully here. He said, "You don't change the course of history by turning the faces of portraits to the wall."
Turning the portrait to the wall is the physical manifestation of intentionally ignoring data.
An information warfare commander knows that you cannot change the reality of an event, and you certainly cannot fortify your defenses for the future if you refuse to look at the full picture head-on.
So we've established the what and the when of this omitted data. Now, the deep dive shifts into the so what.
This is arguably the most critical juncture for you listening right now. Why does understanding this history transition from being an interesting academic exercise to a mandatory, non-negotiable requirement for leadership?
Especially for those who swear an oath to the country. Zynga speaks directly to his military peers here, though the framework applies to anyone holding a position of authority.
When a military officer or any federal official swears an oath, they do not swear allegiance to a king or a political party.
Right. They swear an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. Zynga argues that this specific oath inherently demands deep historical literacy.
You cannot effectively defend a system if you do not understand its source code and its patch history.
He details very specific historical realities that leaders must grasp to be competent. It's not about rote memorization of battle dates. It's about understanding the systemic why.
For instance, why the Civil War remains America's bloodiest conflict by a massive margin.
Or why the Constitution, as originally drafted with compromises like the Three-Fifths Clause, fundamentally required the massive patch updates of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments just to function closer to its stated ideals.
He also highlights why Juneteenth had to become the second National Independence Day, representing the actual enforcement of freedom.
And he points to a profound psychological paradox that military leaders in particular have to reconcile if they want to lead diverse teams today.
The reality is that Black Americans have fought in every single American conflict, from the Revolutionary War through the Civil War, the World Wars, up to the modern era.
Yet for generations, these veterans returned home to a society that subjected them to systemic segregation, redlining, the unequal implementation of the GI Bill, and horrific racial violence.
Put yourself in the boots of a leader trying to build unit cohesion. You have to understand the psychological weight of a demographic that has repeatedly bled for the expansion of freedom abroad, only to have those exact same freedoms denied to them upon returning home.
If you don't understand that cultural memory, you cannot effectively lead the people carrying it.
This exact point usually triggers the loudest friction in the public square. When people hear this catalog of historical grievances and systemic failures, they immediately feel a profound sense of defensiveness.
They feel personally attacked by the past.
But Zynga unpacks a crucial distinction here that serves as a relief valve for that political tension. And this is the distinction that I think will resonate deeply with our listeners who feel exhausted by this topic. What is the relief valve?
Zynga states unequivocally that history should never be taught to assign inherited guilt.
Inherited guilt, meaning the listener sitting in their car or at their desk today in 2026 is not personally responsible for the institutional sins committed in 1865 or 1944.
Correct. Blame is backward-looking, static, and ultimately unproductive for a leader. Assigning toxic guilt causes people to shut down their cognitive receptors.
Instead, Zynga argues that history must be taught to cultivate wisdom, humility, gratitude, and better judgment.
You analyze the data of the past to forge a more resilient operating system for the future. The ultimate objective is not condemnation. The objective is comprehensive understanding.
There's a specific phrase he uses in the article that stopped me in my tracks. He writes, "Understanding these realities does not diminish America. It explains America."
It is a phenomenal distillation of the entire thesis.
It explains America. It is so refreshing to hear it framed this way. So often in the media, we are presented with a relentless, inescapable, false binary.
Either you love your country unconditionally and therefore you must aggressively ignore its flaws, or you study its flaws and therefore you must fundamentally hate your country.
Zynga obliterates that binary. He shifts history away from being a weapon of condemnation and repositions it as a diagnostic tool for understanding.
If we extrapolate this to everyday leadership, the applications are immense. Whether you are managing a small creative agency or running a department at a massive hospital.
Or steering a Fortune 500 company.
Right. Cultivating an organizational culture that studies its failures without assigning toxic inherited guilt is the absolute hallmark of a resilient enterprise. Think about it. If your engineering team is terrified that analyzing a past software failure will result in someone being scapegoated and fired, what will they do?
They will hide the data. They will sweep the bug under the rug until it crashes the whole server. They will turn the portrait to the wall.
Exactly. But if the culture is fundamentally built on learning, where we look at the failure openly to gain wisdom, patch the vulnerability, and improve our collective judgment, that organization will dominate its space.
Zynga is simply applying this incredibly sound, proven organizational principle to the United States as a whole.
We know we need to study the full data set, and we know we need to approach it for wisdom rather than guilt. But how do we actually do that on a practical level?
How do we reprogram our own analytical engines if we've come up through an educational system that omitted so many of these logs?
To give you a practical tool for developing this historical wisdom, Zynga transitions his article into a sort of book report, and we're going to dive deep into that analysis now.
He highlights a text written nearly a century ago, but when you hear the concepts, it sounds like a white paper published this morning on cybersecurity and cognitive defense.
He brings us back to Dr. Carter G. Woodson, specifically focusing on Woodson's seminal 1933 book, The Miseducation of the Negro.
Zynga gives this book a glowing 5 out of 5 stars. He highly recommends it not just for historians, but specifically for military officers, cyber professionals, educators, and civic leaders.
Basically, if you aspire to lead other human beings, this is required reading.
The central premise of Woodson's book is an analysis of psychological infrastructure.
Woodson examined how generations of African Americans were educated within a system that systematically excluded their own history, their achievements, and their contributions to human civilization.
The result of this massive data omission wasn't just a simple lack of trivia facts, it was a deep psychological conditioning.
The educational system conditions students to accept incredibly narrow narratives and limited expectations for themselves, rather than encouraging true, independent, expansive thought.
It is exactly like they were programmed with an operating system that intentionally throttled their own processing power.
That is the perfect way to contextualize it. But what Zynga emphasizes, and this is the key takeaway for every single listener, regardless of your background, is that Woodson's underlying message is entirely universal.
The core thesis is a philosophical exploration of what education is actually supposed to be.
Education is supposed to liberate the mind, provide the tools for critical analysis, and prepare citizens to contribute meaningfully to society.
It should not merely force compliance or demand the unquestioning memorization of a sanitized, incomplete narrative.
There's a standout quote from Woodson's book that Zynga highlights, and it hits like a freight train. When you control a man's thinking, you do not have to worry about his actions.
It is a chilling observation, particularly when you realize it is being analyzed by a modern information warfare commander who deals with psychological operations and narrative control.
I want to really build out a metaphor here to understand how Zynga views this. He doesn't view this quote as pure doom and gloom cynicism.
He views it as a stark reminder that education builds the architecture of citizenship. Think of your education as a cognitive firewall.
In computing, a firewall inspects packets of data coming into your network. If the data matches the security rule set, it lets it in. If it looks malicious, it drops the packet.
Now, if your education only ever taught you what to think like, memorize this specific date, accept this specific narrative without ever questioning the source, your cognitive firewall has no rule set.
It is set to allow all. You are incredibly susceptible to narrative hacking.
You have no internal defenses when a bad actor introduces a convincing lie or a piece of propaganda.
But if you are taught how to think, how to investigate primary sources, how to weigh contradictory evidence, how to understand the context of data, your mind is secure.
You have a robust cognitive firewall that can inspect incoming information and drop the malicious packets.
That firewall is exactly what Woodson was trying to build for his readers in 1933. And Zynga extracts 5 specific, actionable leadership lessons from this book to help us continually update our own firewalls today.
Let's walk through them because they are deeply practical. I want to frame these not just as historical lessons, but as operational protocols.
The first lesson Zynga extracts is learn the complete story.
This anchors us right back to our initial data analogy. Leaders make superior decisions when they understand the complete historical context of the environment they are operating in.
Incomplete information mathematically guarantees incomplete judgment. You cannot lead a diverse organization effectively if your understanding of the world is based on a fraction of the story.
You have to establish a complete baseline configuration. The second protocol, never stop learning.
Zynga notes that true education does not terminate when you are handed a diploma. The best leaders in any field are relentlessly, obsessively curious.
They read broadly, they seek out perspectives outside their own echo chambers, and they continually expand their understanding.
In cyber terms, the external threat environment is always evolving, which means your internal system requires constant updates. If you stop learning, your software becomes obsolete and vulnerable.
Protocol number 3, think critically. We just touched on this with the firewall, but how does Zynga apply this to daily leadership?
This is the active packet inspection. Accepting information without rigorous examination actually weakens your leadership capability.
Woodson, and by extension Zynga, demands that readers actively investigate the evidence presented to them, compare different perspectives, draw informed, independent conclusions.
Don't just sit in a meeting and accept the PowerPoint slide at face value because the person presenting it sounds confident. Ask to see the raw data.
Protocol number 4, build others. This shifts the focus from internal defense to network resilience.
Knowledge carries a heavy burden of responsibility. It is not enough to just secure your own mind and your own terminal. True leaders mentor, teach, and help others discover their own intellectual potential.
You have to secure the entire network by ensuring everyone around you has strong critical thinking skills. An organization is only as secure as its most vulnerable user.
And the final protocol, number 5, preserve history.
A society or an organization that intentionally forgets, obscures, or deletes parts of its history risks losing incredibly valuable, hard-won lessons about resilience, courage, innovation, and citizenship.
The archives exist for a reason. Maintaining immutable backups of your historical data ensures you don't have to relearn painful lessons from scratch.
So we have explored the abstract theory, we've analyzed the stark mathematical reality of the timeline, and we've unpacked a highly practical, century-old playbook for building a cognitive firewall.
Now the discussion has to move to the immediate practical application for you, the listener, navigating the world today.
How do you actually go out and find this omitted data? Because if we're honest, being told you are missing huge chunks of history sounds incredibly daunting. Where do you even begin?
It does sound overwhelming, but Zynga offers a very empowering, stabilizing, foundational belief here. He operates on the principle that the truth does not fear investigation.
The truth does not fear investigation. If a narrative is solid, it welcomes scrutiny.
Exactly. Zynga is not asking anyone reading his article or anyone listening to this deep dive right now to blindly accept his conclusions just because he has an impressive title.
In fact, doing so would violate his third protocol about critical thinking. Instead, he is issuing a wide-open invitation to go look at the primary sources yourself.
He literally provides the receipts for where this data lives. He points out that this data isn't locked away in some classified subterranean vault.
He points to vast, incredibly accessible public repositories of evidence. We are talking about reading the raw transcripts of congressional debates.
Looking at military service records. Reading the actual text of Supreme Court opinions. Exploring the National Archives, the Library of Congress, and the Smithsonian Institution.
Zynga uses a phrase that summarizes the accessibility issue perfectly. He says, "The evidence has never disappeared. Much of it has simply become unfamiliar."
It's unfamiliar because it was left off the syllabus, not because it ceased to exist.
So let's turn this directly to the listener. Zynga poses a series of leadership reflection questions at the end of his piece, and I want you to actually wrestle with these as you go about your day.
First question, what parts of American history were missing from your education? Think back to your high school civics class or your college history seminars.
What were the gaps? What narratives were glossed over in a single paragraph?
The second question pushes you from reflection into action. What original documents have you actually read for yourself, rather than just reading about them in a textbook summary or a social media post?
That is a critical distinction in the age of information overload. Reading the actual raw text of the 13th Amendment takes about 2 minutes. Hey, have you read it? Or have you only read someone else's interpretation of it?
And the third question ties it all back to your own operational readiness. If you aspire to lead, whether that is leading a family, coaching a community sports team, or directing a multinational corporation, what historical lessons shape your judgment?
What foundational data set are you running your daily decision-making algorithms on? These questions are profound because they demand active participation. They aren't rhetorical.
And that is exactly how Zynga concludes his argument, with a clear, actionable mandate. He says, don't let your engagement stop with this article.
Go read one original document. Visit one museum, study one Supreme Court decision, listen to one oral history recording.
Just one. You don't have to consume the entire archive in a weekend. Start with one data point. It is an iterative process of patching your knowledge base.
He connects this deeply personal, quiet pursuit of knowledge directly to the unfinished work that Abraham Lincoln spoke of in the Gettysburg Address.
Building a more perfect union isn't a passive event that happens by magic or by wishing for it. It requires an active, informed, historically literate citizenry continuously doing the work of investigation.
So what does this all mean as we pull the threads together? Let's synthesize the journey we've taken on this deep dive.
We started with the joy, the fireworks, and the necessary sobering reflection demanded by America's 250th birthday.
We looked at a very common, quiet question about why Black history specifically matters, and we watched a cyber expert reframe it entirely.
He took it out of the culture war arena and repositioned it as a critical issue of operational readiness, data integrity, and leadership competence.
We examined the stark, unforgiving mathematics of the American timeline.
We recognize the profound reality that the era of systemic enslavement still vastly outweighs the era of legal freedom in sheer years, and we won't hit parity until 2111.
We looked at Dr. Carter G. Woodson's century-long effort to patch the educational mainframe, recognizing that omitting data doesn't just hide facts, it actively cripples a citizen's ability to think independently and resist narrative manipulation.
And we learned that facing the complete story, the incredible triumphs, the soaring rhetoric, and the profound systemic failures does not diminish the organization. It explains it.
It builds wisdom, not toxic guilt. To be truly well-informed, to be a secure system, you must look at all the logs.
There is a historical proverb quoted early in Zynga's text that I think summarizes the stakes perfectly. History is a scar.
A scar means the body survived, the body healed, but the trauma was real. If we constantly hide the scar, if we pretend it isn't there, we forget the wound.
We forget the vulnerability that caused it, and we risk bleeding again. Facing the complete story is an act of supreme civic duty.
It is how you keep the system secure for the next generation.
It is, in the truest sense, the ultimate after-action review of the American experiment.
It really is. Now, as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you go about your day. Something to explore on your own that builds on the incredible framework Zynga has laid out, but pushes it into the future.
If we fully adopt Zynga's model treating history as an ongoing, continuous incident report that we must study to improve our future operations, we have to recognize a slightly uncomfortable truth.
We are currently living in and creating the data that future generations will study. The year 2026 is tomorrow's history.
We are the logs that someone else will be reviewing a century from now.
Yes. So the provocative question for you to consider is this. What are the systemic blind spots or omitted truths in our current society right now, today, that will require a massive, uncomfortable after-action review by leaders 50 or 100 years from now?
What are the things happening right in front of us that we are intentionally turning the portrait to the wall on?
I challenge you to apply Woodson's demand for rigorous, independent, critical thinking to the narratives of today, not just the past. What data logs are we currently failing to read?
Because you cannot patch a system if you refuse to study its vulnerabilities.
Keep your cognitive firewall strong. Question the narratives and read the original documents. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today.
All right, so that's it for our premiere podcast episode on Black History Year. And today was really about why Black history is important, why every American needs to study Black history, because Black history is indeed American history. So I am going to, in the next 5 minutes, do a back-to-back podcast. We are going to do the episode 2 for Black History Year. It's going to be about our Black History Year communities, Black History Year bookshelf. So the bookshelf, we are building this digital library, and so far we have over 200 books now. I started with 125, so I need your input. Let us build one of the world's largest collection of Black history, and definitely looking forward to your input. Thank you for watching. So I'm going to end this podcast now, and if you're online, I'm going to see you in about 5 minutes. So bye for now.
Thank you for tuning in to the Leadership and Success Podcast with your host, Coach BZ. If today's episode added value to your leadership journey, be sure to subscribe, share, and join us again for more wisdom nuggets on how to lead better and achieve greater success. Remember, leadership is the most critical skill of our time. The world will always need leaders to inspire others, drive innovation, and execute meaningful strategy. So why not count yourself among the bold leaders shaping the 21st century? Until next time, stay inspired, stay committed, and keep leading with excellence.